I have the honor of introducing Lisa Bellinger, who is from the Leech Lake band of the Ojibwe tribe here in Minnesota. She is an educator, she is a human rights defender, she is a lifeline, she is a grandma, she is a mom, and she works for the St. Paul schools as a cultural specialist. She also helps Janice LaFleur in and at the Montessori American Indian Child Care Center located at St. Paul. Would you please help me in welcoming Ms. Bellinger?
For that beautiful introduction and for the beautiful song and those words, they just like gave me a tear. So, Buju, Visuains Indigeni Kaz Wabajation Dori, Kasagas Wachimi Kari Dojla, Minuwa Karika and Diana, Badi Nishnavi, Dianoki, St. Paul schools and Montessori. And I greet you. My Ojibwe name is Younglings Woman. My clan is Martin. I'm Ojibwe from the Leech Lake Nation. I live in Minneapolis and I work with St. Paul schools and the Montessori program. And I am forever Anishinaabe Ojibwe, a member of our Grand Medicine Society as well as our Water Society and the Warrior Society. So I welcome you today to our traditional homelands here. The Ojibwe and Dakota people, this is our homelands in this area. The Dakota, this is their traditional homelands, their place of creation from their time that they were put here on Mother Earth. And Anishinaabe, we joined them later on, migrating from the East Coast and following the ancient prophecy that told us to travel to the place where food grows out of water, which would be the wild race. I grew up here in the Twin Cities as daughter of one of the founders of the American Indian movement, and also founding the two tribal parent-controlled survival schools, the Red Schoolhouse here in St. Paul and Heart of the Earth Survival School in Minneapolis. She worked with the St. Paul, back then it was George P. Young, and I believe it was Mayor Oliver, and worked hard on helping to create St. Paul Open School, which I attended, but at that point, still seeing a need for parents still struggling in the school system, both in St. Paul and Minneapolis, with cultural protocol, practice, tradition, colliding with educational structure and systems. Our fall harvest time for wild rice harvest happened to be at the beginning of the school year, right? And the school would say, well, no, your children need to be in school, but can't you plan your ricing around the school calendar? Well, you tell that to the stars, because we were told when the stars, certain stars lined up, that's when we were to go out and pick our rice. So the schools were born. And being the daughter of such a mover and shaker, I found myself picketing, marching, protesting, sitting in. In fact, my first police ride in the back of a police car was with my mother. my FBI file, again, courtesy of my mother. So social justice, social change, human rights, treaty rights run through my veins like water, like blood. And at a very early age, at St. Paul Open School, we said, we need a program for American Indian. You know, we want to learn about our own people, our own history. And Open School was open enough to say, okay, you pull it together, you have it. So I did. And with the help of many other students from St. Paul, we created our first St. Paul Open School Indian Education program before they were popular and cool. So, you know, in grades 7 and 8, we were peer educating, bringing in speakers, and the school gave us that opportunity. Meanwhile, the 2 schools were born here in the Twin Cities, Red Schoolhouse and Heart of the Earth. Since my mom worked at the St. Paul AIM office, which was housed with Red Schoolhouse, I chose to go to Heart of the Earth so I wouldn't be on my mother's thumb. Yeah. And I worked in Heart of the Earth as well. I graduated from there, I worked there. My children went to school there, so I was like in the teachers, you know, just trying to be part of their education as well. And through all this work and social change and social justice training that I had firsthand and in the midst of everything, and in true Montessori style, I guess you would say, you know, I just learned, that's how I grew up. And eventually it led me to the doors of the United Nations, and I found myself in the United Nations watching this incredible voting bloc, the US, Canada, UK, and Australia, as they vote no to the right to food. And then try to justify it saying, well, we're one of the biggest food aid providers in the world. Well, then why would you vote right? You know, don't take me there. So my passion is and always has been social change, social justice, human rights, treaty rights, since I was a teenager. So, as I began recently working with the Montessori and learning the Montessori method, so I've worked in mainstream schools since I was like 20, and if you count my early teaching days at Open School as a student, that puts me back teaching for, I'm not even tell you what year, but. So I learned watching Janice at the Minnesota American Indian, the Montessori Child Care Center, and I was thinking, I thought, wow, this is, you know, Janice says, this is so similar to how we learn and teach as American Indian, as Native Indigenous people. And when working with the Human Rights Center at the University of Minnesota, we developed a curriculum in conjunction with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. And we developed this process model for teaching human rights education, and, you know, with this base in social justice. And we utilize a traditional learning pattern or style where when we look at how do we learn as natural or indigenous people, if you go back to your way back, you know, we learn by seeing, we learn by hearing, and if we see that in our communities, our children are bound in cradle boards. If you learn about American Indian families and raising children in life ways, you see that our children are in cradle boards. Why? Well, there's a couple of reasons, but the big thing is that we're working on our children they're building their sensory, their seeing and their hearing. And so the children are with us at all points during the day, but they're bound in their cradle boards, and then they get, we take them out to feed them and watch them and hold them and all of that. But in between times, they're in their cradle board, or they're in their, like a hammock swing or traditional swings for them. Again, wrapped tightly so that their mind and their seeing, their hear, so that natural learning process, we see, we hear. And then demonstrate, and then the children think about it and they relate and they try to relate it to something that they already understand and those pre-connecting educational experiences that they had, and then they plan it, they see how they can do it, and then they try it, they implement it, and then they go back and they review it. And so that was the way we developed our human rights process model in education. And as I watched and learned through Montessori, I thought, wow, that's incredible. We did that before. So, am I okay with the microphone? And as an educator, it was always in my heart, and you can ask any of my former supervisors, you know, there's always Lisa wanting to take the kids somewhere and do something with them. Whether we're out speaking, whether we're marching, whether we're just doing a community engagement project, whether it's around recycling, but most likely you'll see most of my work is around water. We participated in I took students on our water walk. And here in Minnesota, in our homelands, we're fighting the sulfide mining up in northern Minnesota, which we're trying to protect our sacred wild rice beds. And we're also protecting Line 3. I don't know if you've heard recently that Minnesota, the Public Utility Commission, you may have seen the banners hanging over the freeway as you came into town. PUC, no Line 3. And they recently approved it, so now the plan is, like how are we, the encampments will probably pick up on the Minnesota-Wisconsin border. I seen the Honor of the Earth posting last night or the other day with Winona LaDuke, and it sounds like people are motivating to move up there for, I can't say what, but another learning opportunity, right? But I would really like to say I'm so honored, and it just moved me to tears this morning to hear those beautiful words that were spoken, and that the music, the song. And it's my dream always to see so many educators come together with the same love and passion for social change, social justice, and that how we work together in education and that beautiful intersect. So I want to say thank you. Welcome again to our homelands, to the land of Ojibwe and Anishinaabe and the Dakota people. Be blessed.
This is a small, just showing our appreciation for sharing your time and your wisdom, and I could listen to you all day, especially about your FBI files.
In a society that does not honor our elders, it's important that we take time to give space, to hear the stories and the wisdom from our elders. So on behalf of Montessori Social Justice, we thank you for your wisdom and your courage and everything that you have done for this land, our society, everything. Thank you so much. Now, MSJ, the best has been King Kitchens, will come to introduce our keynote speakers.
Good morning, everybody. I am so humbled and honored to have the opportunity to introduce our incredible keynote speakers today. Before I give you their resumes and their long lists of professional accomplishments, I want to talk about their generosity of spirit, the way that they change you just by being in fellowship with you. I met Roberto when he was the Director of Student Affairs and Services at the school that we worked at together. He remains the most influential administrator that I've ever been touched by. His challenge, support, deep love and advocacy for children have left an indelible mark on me as a teacher and as a person. He's changed the way that I guide children and hold space for them forever. I knew before I met Lorena that she was incredible because of the way that Roberto talked about her and honored her. Even with his high praise, he didn't really do her justice. Lorena is engaging. She's on fire for justice and embodies what City Garden calls radical hospitality, that kind that lifts you up while holding you accountable. And on top of all that, they're really hilarious. I have 2 children who are here today, so we can all say hi to Annalise and Zion. Roberto is the child of immigrants from the Dominican Republic and is eternally grateful for the sacrifices of both of his parents. Lorena was born in the Dominican Republic and was raised in the U.S. Currently, both are working at Headwaters School in Austin, Texas. Lorena is a middle and high school teacher, and Roberto is the new head of middle school. They share a combined 30 years of experience in public and private classroom settings and administrative settings. Lorena is the chair of NCTE's Committee Against Racism and Bias in the Teaching of English, and Roberto serves as the chair of the Rupert Committee for Montessori for Social Justice. In addition to their professional talents, Roberto is a spoken word poet and a rapper, and Lorena, I just learned this, is a black belt in Taekwondo, and is the former champion in the Dominican Republic. Both speak Spanish fluently, and name is an important part of their identities and culture. The work of social justice is central to their practice, shaping how they guide their students and their community. I'm so honored to have both of you here today, and I'm so excited that Zion and Annalise are going to get to experience watching you both up here changing our community. So let's all stand up, or not stand, well, stand up at the table, and every now and then just give a shout. Please join me in welcoming
And you're not supposed to cry during an intro, but just the way my hormones are set up right now.
Good morning. Good morning. Everybody hear me all right?
Yes.
That intro was way too much. I've been telling Katie for months to stop hyping us up. I told Tiffany the same yesterday. I told Dr. Evans the same yesterday. Y'all ain't getting the message. There's just too much love to go around in this space. We are greatly appreciative to be here, not just to share the keynote address, but just to be in the presence of all these educators that are digging in so deeply into discussions that people do not want to engage in. We're appreciative for your commitment to be present. We're appreciative for your commitment to be challenged. Appreciative for your commitment to step back and receive some things that can be very hard to receive, and to share some things that can be very hard to share. We're very appreciative for the child care. Sunny Hollow, y'all have a special relationship with us. It is hard to raise children. I love my kids. It's hard. and drop them off, you know, naturally there's a little bit of anxiousness about like, how is this all gonna work out? And then I leave, she'll just grab my leg, and I'm like trying to shake her off. We gotta go. The guys there were so loving and so welcoming, so accommodating. Well, once I left, I felt at peace. I knew she was in good hands, even though I didn't know them personally. The way they approached my child let me know that she's going to be all right. And that means a lot to me as a parent. And the Montessori way has a lot to do with that also. Knowing that freedom is going to be encouraged, independence. Annalise is very much herself. She has a very big personality. And so encouraging that freedom and independence. That's something that I've come to really appreciate about Montessori, because I come from schools, not just in my own learning experience, but as a professional, I come from schools in which freedom and independence is not only, it's not encouraged, but it's also robbed from you. And so thank you to the folks at Sunny Hollow Montessori for the child care you provided the past few days, not just to my child, but to the other children that were in their care. Thank you to all of the food. The food's been incredible, huh? Yeah, it's been incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, vegetables are bad in our household. There's so many things to go around, and we won't get around to everybody. I'm grateful for the university for hosting. This is a beautiful university. It's really green here. And it's been beautiful to listen to the contextualizing of this land by groups of people who are not acknowledged and dispossessed. I am very grateful for our elders who've been sharing and giving us context and helping us to acknowledge and to honor the space that we're in. So thank you. And a special thank you to the MSJ board. Y'all have done a lot of work to put this conference together. I told you to stop pumping me up. So this is where we go eye for eye. This conference may very well be the best conference I've ever attended. I'm not giving it the full stamp yet because I haven't had enough time to process it. It's just too much. I'm not even over the child care thing. Revolutionary. The way that MSJ has partnered with the community, the focus on people of the global majority, on business owners of the global majority, the thoughtfulness that has been put into all aspects of this conference. Let's not take this for granted. What we're experiencing here, I'll speak for myself. Now I'll be bold enough to speak for you too. What we're experiencing here is pretty unique. I don't typically go to conferences and feel like I'm really loved. I feel like I might receive some content and I might leave more knowledgeable might receive some new ideas. This is a whole different experience right here. What if we all went to conferences in which we left feeling loved, affirmed, empowered? Good Lord, what would that do to us as educators? We'd light this up. I don't think they want that. So I've been thinking about for the past few days just what I've been experiencing. And I've received a lot. So I'm grateful for all of y'all who have not only constructed this, but for those who have led in different ways, who have served in different ways, people who have helped with our children who we just met for the first time, wonderful workshops being led by you amazing educators. Althea got everybody dancing. Can't stop. I'm grateful for that, you know, to be in this space at this time with you all who have welcomed us into the Montessori community. People from Lawrence, Massachusetts who didn't know jack about Montessori until we got to Austin, but until we got with y'all, you know, I think that's when we started to understand like how the power, the impact that Montessori can have if we're approaching it from this social justice lens. When we came into Montessori, I came into Montessori, I was just, I don't know what is going on. I don't know what's happening. You know, this is a little, yeah. Because we come from an experience where it's all worksheets. It's all worksheets that we can do in 5 minutes, and it's not challenging, and as long as you sit in your straight rows and don't disrupt, you're good. Although you're not coming out learning much. And so, when I think about all of the work that you are investing, not just in this conference, but in your respective schools, as I listen to you, as I engage in different conversations with folks and learn about the good work that's happening all over the place, leaving very inspired and encouraged. So I want to thank you for that. Now we can get started. When it rains, it pours. When it rains, it pours. When it rains, it pours. Standing at the front door with no hoodie on because you could get shot for that. Trying to stay dry, where's that sunshine? At some point, we have to step out and breathe this polluted air. While gasping for it, Eric Gardner said, I can't breathe. But U.S. courts are more concerned with outlawing black hair. Gotta rock t-shirts calling for the liberation of our scalps. Because after all, this is America. Don't catch you slipping up. Don't catch you slipping up. Look what I'm whipping up. This is America. And while some may say, don't be childish, I'd argue that it's more childish to be disturbed by a video as opposed to the real life situations that inspired the video. Then again, video evidence from July 6, 2016 didn't prove to be enough to indict Geronimo. Moment of silence for Philando. When you consider the social and political climate in which we currently live, It's understandable how one can get to a place in which they feel there's no end in sight to this reign that is precipitated by historical oppression. We know what the forecast calls for, but umbrellas are at a premium. When a group is always seen as broken or other, it typically leads to the type of thinking that results in the misuse of power and abuse. As we've seen with migrant families on the border, thousands of children being separated from their families, placed in detention centers and shelters to endure inhumane conditions that will have long-lasting effects. As we've seen with Executive Order 13769, limiting access and opportunities to Muslims who are being viewed as the very terrorists they're trying to flee from. As we've seen with young black men dying at the hands of law enforcement. In addition, we have the murder of trans people, school shootings, mass incarceration, racism, sexism, and more. This is the reality of the hardships we relive every single day. How do we stay dry when it's pouring outside and we can't avoid the rain? How do we stay dry when it's pouring outside and we can't avoid the rain? How do we stay dry when it's pouring outside and we can't avoid the rain? Montessori said, if intelligence is the triumph of life, the spoken word is the marvelous means of which intelligence is manifested. The quote resonates with me because when I'm in the process of creating or developing a presentation or composing, my ideas are typically accompanied by songs that ultimately serve as a soundtrack for my creative process. And thinking about the notion of joy as a form of resistance, several songs came to mind. I'd like to share some snippets with you in hopes of bringing you along the journey with me. The first one we were playing when you first came in. Maybe some of you missed it. Go ahead and play it again for you. Because music has a way of moving, right? I know my people that are moving our music as soon as the beat drops. It's all right to do some off the move, you know? Take it back. This is Tony Rosado. And that Caribbean culture out there is blood. So it just comes to mind. And alegría translates into joy in English. Alegría, 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 alegría. You can't roll like that. You just say joy. We want to encourage people too, right? I said talk in a flat day. '93, Tupac Shakur released the classic track, Keep Your Head Up, which was a hood anthem. It really spoke to the experience of people in urban communities across the country, much like Marvin Gaye's What's Going On did in 1971. And Tupac just had a marvelous way of bringing you along this journey in song in which you experience moments of joy, pain, sunshine, and rain. And in analyzing this song, Keep Your Head Up, there were a couple bars in the second verse, towards the end of the second verse, that caught my attention. He says the following: it seems the rain will never let up. I try to keep my head up and still keep from getting wet up. You know it's funny, when it rains, it pours. They got money for wars, but can't feed the poor. There ain't no hope for the youth, and the truth is there ain't no hope for the future. The song itself still resonates with me, given that I grew up in what is known as the golden era of rap and all that. Yet I have to challenge the assertion that Tupac makes in the last two bars of this excerpt. One could picture Maria Montessori rolling around in her grave upon hearing these lyrics about hopelessness for the youth in the future. If she were a rapper, if Maria Montessori were a rapper, this is right about the time she clapped back. Like this. The child is both a hope and promise for mankind. Guides in search of the greatest signs of success will know they've found it when the children work as if the gods don't exist. The child has other powers than ours. Within the child lies the fate of the future. The land is where our roots are. Salute, y'all. I just added the salute, y'all. The rest of that, I can't even claim that. You know, I'm striking that. Shoot, that's all. And I think that's exactly how she would have spit those bars. And while the overarching theme of Tupac's Keep Your Head Up aims to encourage, there's a heavy dose of pain which he bears that leads him to make this proclamation of hopelessness. And if we're honest with ourselves, there have been times in which we have all likely struggled with always thinking of our students and their communities as marginalized or oppressed, even in efforts centered on empowerment. And as crazy as it seems, one way that oppressed groups have sustained themselves over time has been through joy. The joy that comes from value and community. The joy of engaging in our rich and diverse cultures that remind us of our ancestors. The strength of their spirits, the value of traditions that have been passed down to us. The joy of overcoming insurmountable challenges and working together to ensure that our children are afforded better opportunities than the ones we have now. The joy that I speak of has been a source of resiliency that has sustained oppressed groups throughout the history of this country. Maria Montessori defined joy as feeling one's own value, being appreciated and loved by others, feeling useful and capable of production. She went on to say that these are all factors of enormous value for the human soul. Our students are deserving of all these factors, which leads us into the concept of culturally sustaining pedagogy.
Still with us?
Yes.
Okay. So I know many of you have heard of a culturally relevant pedagogy and also a culturally responsive pedagogy. Both of these theories encourage teachers to involve students in the curriculum and practice a culturally competent approach. The OG, the originator, the mama in these academic streets, Dr. Gloria Lattimore. She inspired Dr. Django Paris to consider the same approach, right? This idea that we've all heard of, and so he then built on that idea. he developed this idea of a culturally sustaining pedagogy because he realized that it was important for us to move beyond simply relating to and being relevant to our students. And so sustaining their practices, their selves, their communities, their languages, all of who they are. And so years later, last year, 2017, he partnered with Dr. Samia Lee, and together, they put together the textbook that we all need to have. You're going to see it in a second. It is called simply that, Culturally Sustaining Pedagogy. And in that book, they break it down and they talk to us about what it is that we need to be doing moving forward. In the introduction of this book, they spend a good amount of time breaking down our context. They offer a strong historical analysis for why we need CSP. That's the acronym I'm going to use because I talk in text. And they explain some of the larger issues that are at work in our society, the problematic patterns that are present, and how damaging all of this has been. They talk about, and I quote, a saga of cultural and linguistic assault that has clearly impacted students and communities of color. So through this work, right, through the book of CSP, they have responded to what they identify as anti-indigeneity, anti-blackness, and anti-brownness, as well as other forms of colonialism. They're asking us to consider what is the purpose of schooling in a pluralistic society, okay? And so they want us to think about what is school supposed to be doing right now in the context that we are in, especially as we consider the increasing demographic changes going on in our classrooms, in our countries, in our communities. They're asking us, what are we supposed to be doing? What is school supposed to be operating as right now? And so they offer, or they explain to us the way that school has been operating historically. And so they say, in the U.S., schools have existed to forward the largely assimilationist and often violent white imperial project, with students and families being asked to lose or deny their languages, literacies, cultures, histories, self, just leave it at the door, come on in, and then you can achieve in our school. And so I want to ask all of you, do you do this in your classroom? Do your classroom practices, do your policies, hey, administrators here, does your school do this to students and families in your community? Are you asking them to do that? Are you furthering this violence? So what is CSP? They have defined it as an approach that seeks to perpetuate and foster, in other words, sustain, a linguistic, literate, and cultural pluralism as part of the democratic project of schooling for positive social transformation. So, what this means, essentially, is that we should aim to decenter whiteness as an institution from our classrooms and curriculum, and to explore the many complexities of our world and lives. We bring in and also discuss the histories of the global majority and their presence. And so many educators do this. We know a lot of educators that understand this idea of a culturally relevant and pedagogy, right? Many people think they do this. Actually, that's another, for another conference. But we have assumed, Roberto and I have assumed that most of you in this room, okay, are doing your best to try to practice this. And so what we want to do is push us a little deeper, to go a little deeper as we think about this idea in our practice. And so even though many of us explore marginalized communities and we attempt to honor their struggle, we do this by centering always on their oppression. Mm-hmm. This is necessary and important. Don't get it twisted. It is very important to honor and to understand the patterns of this country. This is correct. But if not done well, there can be a great damage performed when we do that we impose, right, on these marginalized students and communities, then we create this reality. We create a reality for some people where these marginalized peoples only exist one way, in the mind and imagination of the rest. In this imagination, the wholeness of marginalized communities is erased. They are lacking, they are seen as victimized, they are only in existence as they relate to their oppressors. Some of us only explore that struggle and pain. This act reveals a dangerous truth, which is that we actually only see them that way, even if unintentionally. This leads to an incomplete understanding of reality, of history, and therefore of humanity. You don't actually understand me. You don't actually understand my family. You don't actually understand the importance of me being in your classroom. Here's an example of this impact. Here's an example of some of the folks, right? This is, well, I was going to say it straight, but not at this time. This is an example of what that looks like. This is a little context. We're going to watch a quick clip. It's hard to watch, so brace yourselves. It's not graphic. It's not graphic. It's from the 2016 election. A congressman speaking on the contributions of certain groups.
In terms of people listening, it's Susana Martinez, the popular governor of New Mexico. You have Mia Love, who has been seen as a rising star African-American woman from Utah, congresswoman. She's actually got a very tough race. Of course, there's also Marco Rubio, who is a former future star of the party who's beaming in. I mean, what does it say about the identity crisis the party has right now? If you're really optimistic, you could say this is the last time that old white people will command the Republican Party's attention, its platform, its public face. Of course, I thought that was going to happen after 2012, and I was, thanks to the good work of Congressman King, I was here. I think he'll still be around, though. I think he'll be around, but I'll tell you what. In that hall today, that hall is wired. That hall is wired by loud, unhappy, dissatisfied white people. Very much. Yes, very much. Any sign of rebellion is going to get shouted down, or shouted down either kindly or roughly. But that's what's going to happen. This white people business does get a little tired, Charlie. I mean, I'd ask you to go back through history and figure out where are these contributions that have been made by these other categories of people that you're talking about. Where did any other subgroup of people contribute more to civilization? And white people? Than Western civilization itself, that's rooted in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and the United States of America, and every place where the footprint of Christianity settled the world. That's all of Western civilization. That if you're looking at the ledger of Western civilization, you got Hitler and Stalin as well. So there's a lot on both sides. Christianity.
Oh my God. Right. We are all equal, right? It's hard to watch, I know, and I've watched it now a couple times in preparation for this. Every time I get hot. So, unfortunately, he's not alone, right? He is not alone. This is, and just so you know, he was interviewed afterwards and asked, like, hey, do you still believe that? Do you want to apologize? And he's like, no, actually, I feel the same way.
I want to go in more.
So this way of thinking, okay, what has built him up, and people like him, many things, one of them, is this idea of a damage-centered narrative. And we're going to break that down for y'all today. It was outlined and clarified for us by Eve Tuck. She was a Native researcher, and she penned a letter in 2009 called Suspending Damage. And she defines this as the narrative or body of work depicting a community as damaged, as broken, and from a generally deficit perspective. So how do we as educators consider this pain that is, remember, important to explore and understand? How do we do this without defining these students and their communities solely by their suffering? These are some really hard conversations to be had in our classrooms, and it's really challenging to walk through them as an educator.
So, Lorena can attest to the fact that I'm not the person you want to invite to go to the movies to watch a narrative about an enslaved person. I just think the movie's a little worked up, feeling all sorts of violent, very unhappy camera. So the first few people who run into me, you might catch the heat. And even in the situations in which the protagonists ultimately triumph, I'm left thinking, why does it have to be another movie about an enslaved person, a maid, butler, prisoner, drug dealer? Has the mainstream media saturated us enough with negative images of people of the global majority? Instead of bringing the world a lens that can help change the narrative, because we know the truth, right? We know that those images don't represent us holistically. They don't represent us as a people. It's just what the media is putting out there. You could say the same thing about schools when we consider curriculum instruction, textbook, wall art, and more. You could say the same thing about schools, that we reinforce this in many ways in our schools. And our stories of resiliency and joy, and therefore our whole selves, are absent. We're seen as only dispossessed, and that is how we exist in the mind of the oppressor.
So as we've already said, right, it is important to offer a historical context for current situations of marginalization and oppression and exploitation. This is not a bad thing. To understand that colonization, for example, is what has led us to where we are today. That it's not so far ago, get over it. Actually, we're still feeling the pain from that, right? It's important for our students to understand how we got to where we are and how this has been maintained. It is critical for them to understand those patterns so that they can identify them and dismantle them. It is important for all students to do this. This is not a conversation for you to have in your classrooms or a cool unit with your predominantly, student of color population. This is very important for predominantly white schools to also be engaging. So regardless of ethnicity, of background, of sexual orientation, of any of the things that your students identify with, as we all need to be engaging and having this conversation. Everybody lives in this country, everybody lives in this world, and we are preparing them to engage in it. They're already engaging in it. So the issue isn't that. The issue, as we're trying to point out here, is that this narrative, this damage-centered narrative, becomes the soul story. What singularly defines that community. Too often, right, the pain is centered without an equal centering on joy. I remember in high school, I went to this predominantly Latino high school in Massachusetts, and almost everybody is Dominican too, so it's even more narrow. And I remember that there was this assignment given to us, and I went home and it had to do with our background, and I was like, okay, cool. I'm gonna draw this little diagram, and I was like, okay, finally I get to talk a little bit about me, because up until that point, none of our curriculum, none of our classes, and even after that, they did not reflect my culture, my language, my history, my people. We were never present in the curriculum. And so I'm at home and I'm working on this project and I'm drawing out my diagram, and I'm done, and it's all cute with colors. I still remember, actually, so picture in my mind, because it was one of the few times where I brought a little piece of me in there. And then I remember thinking, just feeling a little sad, actually. I'm a little embarrassed. Because the truth of this paper, what I had to, part of the task I so, you know, the truth is that is part of my history. But because this wasn't part of the curriculum and it wasn't developed in a way where I could bring all of me, including my joy and my merengue, alegría, right? That's all that came in. And so in that way, a damage-centered narrative offends the deepest sense of our humanity. A damage-centered narrative expects me to be in pain. It expects me to be hurting, to be longing, to be deprived, to be unfulfilled, to be incomplete, to be in need, to be less than, to be lacking. In a damage-centered narrative, I am always weak. I am always the victim.
And some of us do it to ourselves. I know I'm guilty as charged. According to ETUP, many marginalized communities engage, allow, and participate in damage-centered research and the construction of damage narratives as a strategy for correcting oppression. In the process of seeking justice, we share our struggles and at times end up exploiting ourselves because we are, understandably, seeking empathy. That will lead to the correction of injustice. Students that are members of oppressed groups may join in on this and also be ready to speak from this point of view. But that is why, as educators, it's important to understand the dynamic and also create space for joy, laughter, celebration.
After that really cool project,
After the awesome presentation,
after an interesting speech,
all that we are left with is pain.
and all that we are left with is damage.
And so a question to ask ourselves, what is the cost of always thinking of students and their communities as marginalized and oppressed? Is it worth it?
Is it worth it? So in addition to struggle and oppression and pain, right, we have to explore desire, wisdom, hope, culture, and joy. Tug, a researcher, reminds us that even when communities are broken and oppressed, they are more than that pain and reality. To present them as solely that is an incomplete representation, like we said earlier, and in fact, it is an aggression. She's asking us to teach from a desire-centered framework, full of joy and survivance. It's about joy and pain and sunshine and rain. Celebrating and discussing both pain and joy is therapeutic for students and teachers. And listen to this part, y'all. It is healing. It is healing. It begins to restore the relationship between marginalized communities and the schools that have historically attempted to, and were often effective, at erasing them, their families, their languages, their practices, their culture, their whole being. It's also healing in the sense that students finally find a space where they can imagine joy, drop their shoulders, take a deep breath, and find the strength to press on. She wants us to think about desire as the song about walking through the storm. A song that recognizes rather than denies that pain doubtlessly lies ahead. Because you see, it's not about denying reality. It's not about superficial, it's okay, yay, we're good, I love you. No, that's not what this is about. This isn't about asking our students to walk around hugging the police officer. Just do it, go hug him. You'll get past that. Discussing and exploring both joy and pain is a more complete understanding of humanity. This allows us to stay away from a white-based single story. A well-developed practitioner of CSP presents the complete story of young people and their communities.
So in thinking about application from our people of the global majority, discussing joy and history with students offers us a model from our ancestors. That resistance is how we're here, this violence is how we exist, this is how we empower ourselves. This is one way to find strength. We get to define our joy. We speak for ourselves. We are not voiceless. We can ignore that we are strong and have been existing. To our white brethren, we must listen. We must acknowledge the already existing strength and power. Additionally, discussing this with students is a way to honor these communities. This is a model for you too.
So, how do we do this? What does this look like in the classroom? How am I going to leave here, and in the fall, or maybe some of you have something to do, I'm sorry. How do I bring this back? And so that's when we come back to this idea of a culturally sustaining pedagogy. This is my twist on it. It's not really a twist. I just condensed it again because I had to talk. So, one that seeks to sustain and foster pluralism as part of schooling for social justice. This is what we're trying to do. This is what we have to do. We do not have the luxury of not doing this. There is no time to not do this. As educators, we embrace our students' whole selves. We welcome all of these voices and ways of being into the classroom at school, and we explore them together. That means all of who they are is worthy of academic study. The stories your grandma tells, bring that in, we're going to study it. The lessons you learned while you were out on the playground about race, bring that in, we're going to talk about it. The poem you wrote over the weekend after watching the news, bring that in, we're going to recite it together. We offer space in our classrooms for young people to imagine and experience joy. This shouldn't be revolutionary, this shouldn't be radical. We work hard to ensure that laughter erupts. We make room for moments of lightness. We explore, encourage, and celebrate the arts. We study the ways communities have celebrated in the midst of pain. We think about how there were actual outlaw slave parties during slavery. I know I've never taught that. We learn from indigenous recipes that nourished their soul as they were under attack. We must study about beautiful religious ceremonies that continue to exist in regions filled with human trafficking. We research the ways Brazilians have developed sustainable communities within poverty-stricken favelas. We allow our students to laugh to keep from crying like we do and we're doing in these current times. We welcome the idea of joy as resistance and survivance, allowing for students' present-day lives to be welcomed into the classroom. Through this exploration, you embrace also modern-day manifestations of their joy. To be joyful in the face of oppression, to be joyful in the face of hate, is to resist.
Yes.
So I'm going to need you to help a little bit right here. I'm going to keep this real simple for y'all. Whenever I point in your direction, not being rude, I'm just asking for your help. Whenever I point in your direction, you were going to say, beautiful. Can we try that one time?
Yes. Beautiful. Beautiful.
Very well.
Are you sure?
Beautiful.
Sweet juice drips from the blackberry on full lips, added to our fullness, and it's just so
beautiful.
Black excellence on screen in 2018. Love what we're seeing, because it looks so
beautiful.
Finally getting shine at the Grammys. It was long overdue, and we're moved because the music is
beautiful.
If we don't say it, who will? Let's keep it real. We got a history that they don't teach the children, and it's
beautiful.
Brown nose, dark tone,
beautiful.
Hair on fleek, all natural. Girl, that's
beautiful.
Me, I got locks in them.
Beautiful.
Shorty got a fade in the wave game flow so
beautiful.
African names like Apollo, Naima, Alameda, you know what I'm gonna say, that's
beautiful.
Black heritage celebration, the embracing of black achievement throughout generations. 4 flowers from a little black boy that sees a black man and thinks to himself, united we stand. Salute the former first lady. When they go low, we go high. And so the black folks that don't die. Like Maya Angelou, still I rise. That's beautiful. Her words left a legacy like she's still alive. I'm black and beautiful. I'm still alive. Yeah, I'm black and beautiful. I'm still alive. Yeah, I'm black and
Beautiful.
I'm still alive. Yeah, black is
Beautiful.
So alive. To provide a little context to this piece, in preparation for the Black Heritage Celebration at Montessori for All, I was asked to perform by a couple parents on the organizing committee. Although I was slightly considering it, I never replied to the email because I thought they'd just move on. I wasn't avoiding participating because I thought it would be a strain on me. As simply as I've gotten older, I've become more of an introvert. I don't even know how all this happened. Like, us being here right now. But nonetheless, here we are. And in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the fact that it was a great opportunity to uplift the community, especially as it relates to our view of blackness. Days before performing this piece, Beautiful Blackness, Katie Kitchens was kind enough to invite me to neighboring Wynn Elementary School to observe in some of the classrooms. At one point, Hayden, a little black boy, comes up to me with this small vase, a little bit of water, 4 tiny flowers. First time you ever seen him. Happy as a clam. I'm from New England. And he's just cheesing. You know, he got his glasses on. He's just like, and you can tell he wants to come and give it to me. Katie. Thank you. I was really moved because for me it was an impactful moment that it brought greater inspiration to this piece, but it also reminded me of the importance of connecting children with identifiable role models and the joy that stems from that for all parties involved. Furthermore, after my performance, Katie shared the video with the father of one of her former students. That student and his 2 siblings were still my students at the time. I had not conversed with the father in like 3 years or something like that, but he reached out to me to express the following. Thank you, Roberto, for your eloquent and passionately heartfelt poetry, reading, and inner sound expression. When you mentioned my children's names, I turned into a butterfly. Thanks, man. It's a shame that in 2018, Black historical information is still not stable in state-funded lesson plans and curriculum. From my heart, thank you for boldly aspiring and daring to do exactly what you do. The note of encouragement serves as a reminder of the importance of presence, the power of words, and the joy that can derive from that.
What we want to continue doing is just showing you more ways to do this. And so I'm going to talk very briefly about a unit of study where I explicitly talked about joy as resistance in my classroom. And I did this with an IB class of mine, and it was a Twitter unit, because you know, everybody on Twitter. But it's also, you know, Twitter is definitely a space where there's a lot going on, and definitely worthy of study, and that's how we bring that joy in, okay? And so, this was, you know, it's called Twitter Love and Magic, because I tried really hard to come up with really cool titles. And this was kind of the question that was in my heart, all right? I work currently with a predominantly white student population. We have students of color, but predominantly it's a white population. And they're engaged and they're ready to work, and I love it, otherwise I wouldn't be there. How can my predominantly white students truly understand the ways that certain marginalized communities' joy exists, and that this joy is in itself an act of resistance? And I wanted to, you know, strategically use marginalized because I wasn't just going to talk about issues of color and race. And so I set out to discuss police brutality, negative media representations, and anti-immigrant sentiment with my students in particular. together and we built an understanding of what's been going on in society, and then finally we all agreed that there was a problem. It's okay, you know. I turned to Twitter then to show them, who are these people, where are they, and how are they resisting? Because they are not sitting idly by, crying, wallowing in their tears. And so we looked at, in particular, these 3 hashtags at the bottom. Black Boy Joy, Black Girl Magic, and I'm Already.
Yes.
These 3 hashtags demonstrated, and you can still find it, it's all still there, the ways that these communities are finding and expressing joy, and then using that joy to build a counter-narrative to the damage-centered narrative and hate-filled rhetoric that's going on in the media about them. The hashtags are a way to resist through laughter, some of them are just hilarious, through fly pictures, never seen such fly men, messages of strength, smiles, genuine smiles, unity and family and celebration. I don't think they thought we were going to find all of that on Twitter. And then for the rest of the unit, what they had to do was work in their own small groups and find their own hashtags and teach us. And some of them went out and, well, they all did, and some focused on issues of net neutrality that was going on at the time. Some students focused on, this is what trans looks like. That was beautiful. And so they all, towards the end, we had a whole conversation and we debriefed, which is part of the culture at our school, where students get to participate and say, like, this is what worked, this didn't, this is how we should do this again. And they were all just shocked that Twitter was in the classroom. They were like, we all went home and told our friends that we're using Twitter for school. And so there was that, right? Like how we also engage who they are. That's them too. They're on Twitter. They're on. Bring that in. And they also talked about the ways that they didn't realize and had never thought about the ways that they were only getting this negative narrative, this damage-centered narrative.
Middle school example that we offer comes from my experience as assistant principal in the 2013-14 school year at the Gilmet Middle School in Lawrence, Massachusetts. That's where I was born and raised, and so the school is literally stationed in the housing projects. Half the school comes from there, the other half comes from housing projects that's a quarter mile down the street. Both very tough housing projects. Many of our students had been exposed to some harsh realities, and they were dealing with serious trauma. And so I wanted to figure out a way to try to proactively introduce something to support some of our most challenging students. One way I worked towards this goal was by partnering with Elevated Thought, an arts-based organization that serves, inspires, and builds communities in need. Together we introduced the C3 program to an identified group of students at the GMS. The C3 stands for Creative Community Change. And some of the program goals were the following: to have students plan and execute complex, original, community-based projects while collaborating, working to build self-confidence and resiliency, help students learn and take the first steps to become social entrepreneurs in the creation of their own community-based project ideas, expose them to various art mediums, set foundations for productive, thought-provoking conversations, and healthy debate in addition to socially minded beautification and renovation ideas, and to have them transform rather to escape. And the leads from Elevated Thought ensure that the students practice with a purpose while promoting and creating awareness related to the wide-scale mural idea based on identified issues in the community. The end goal was the completion and unveiling of the students' society-conscious mural idea to the public. The art gallery was accompanied by a literacy night and an open mic night led by another community partner, Andover Bretland. It was an evening of food, art, writing, and hope, and of course, joy. The elementary example that I'll offer you comes from some work I did towards the end of this school year at Montessori for All. Ms. Christina Keller, who's present, was gracious enough to welcome me into her classroom to lead a writing workshop. And this classroom is a classroom that's racially, ethnically, socioeconomically
write in whatever language makes you comfortable. In fact, you can write in multiple languages if you would like. And this led to some students putting their guards down and making themselves vulnerable. It also created a sense of pride and joy as they shared their authentic selves with their peers and with their guides. And even if one was not fully able to understand certain words that the children were saying, what you did understand was their connection to those words. For example, Lillian, a first grader, wrote a bilingual poem about her love of art. The poem states the following: Arte, como somos. It's just like a different language. Solo even como un sueño. It is like a story. Almost todo connected, but yet un tiny difference. Feel feliz y paz. That's what it makes me feel. Good, I guess. Witnessing Lillian share this piece brought great joy to my heart. She's smiling ear to ear, and she's so proud of herself, sharing in her native language, and that's one of her assets. So we want to encourage that. We want to encourage students to bring out their authentic selves.
And so next, I took a deep dive into an uncharted territory. And I went to the primary classroom. And so here's an example of something, one way to bring in joy with 3 to 5 units, which, is not that hard. It can get out of control rather quickly. So I went to my daughter's school, that's actually Annalise. Maybe she's out. At the bottom over there, just so cute, so good. So we went to her classroom, and what I wanted to do was bring with me an instrument, okay, which is native to the Dominican Republic, to our island, shared with our brothers and sisters in Haiti, and share with them this instrument, sing a couple of songs, and just begin proactively to counter, the counter narrative to what I know they're going to hear later, because it's already being said now by our current administration, specifically about education. So, we need to do that too, right? Part of the fact isn't to rectify, but to begin to build before we get there. And so, Zion was my assistant, and Annalise became my impromptu assistant. And so I brought with me the guira, and it's native to our island, and I shared it with them. I played it a little bit. Some people were like, "Oh, that's so loud." I was like, "You should listen to my husband talking." Then I had a couple folks come up and just try the instrument out while holding my hand because it's very sharp. And then together we sang the Itsy Bitsy Spider while playing this, right? And and I also have to give a shout out to the teacher Claire. She's here. I love her. For being open to this, for engaging in this work, for being intentional about welcoming me, about welcoming this instrument, and reaching out to parents and asking for cultural visits and lessons. That makes a difference, right? When I heard that, because originally I was like, oh gosh, I don't want to impose. I'm definitely coming in. I don't want to step on her toes. I hope this is positive. And then she sends an email saying cultural lessons, and I was like, right? So you can certainly do that. That's a great model to us from Claire. And so exploring joy, helping students resist oppression, creating spaces for growth and critical analysis, and enacting a culturally sustaining pedagogy can happen in any classroom. There are no excuses. It is only up to you.
Ask again. How do we stay dry when it's pouring outside and we can't avoid the rain? How do we stay dry when it's pouring outside and we can't avoid the rain? How do we stay dry when it's pouring outside and we can't avoid the rain? By knowing that joy and sunshine awaits us. Keep your head up. It's contagious and it inspires joy, which is a form of resistance and partly how we help our students endure. This meaningful time that we spend in the summer recharging our batteries isn't about serving institutions. It's about serving children.
Yes.
Our drive to return the following school year, it's really our students who are at the heart of it all. We help our students endure through the example of marginalized communities' resilience. So as we conclude, let us all consider the type of changes we need to make in our practice in order to sustain marginalized communities. Let us consider the specific action steps we will take. Let us consider the improvements we can adapt in our approach to operate from a culturally sustained pedagogy standpoint. Let us consider the changes we can make to the physical space in our classrooms to operate from a CSP standpoint. All of these considerations are done with the intent of bringing our students more joy because they deserve to feel valued, appreciated, loved, useful, and capable of production, for they are all factors of enormous value